Lovely book to have, that one. Really like it. So my next book, continuing the education of your viewers, is not something, I bought it like this, but it's a good lesson to learn. And that is Silver Surfer #3, first appearance of Mephisto. Lovely comic, really, really nice comic. I picked this up for an absolute steal at a local comic fair. Didn't pay much for this at all. But as you can see, that is supposed to be a really nice bright red cover. But this has been exposed to sunlight for a period of time and it's completely faded, which is a real shame because the book itself is in pretty good nick. It's another one of those square bound books, so it does have the usual issues at the corners and things. It's got some fold damage at the back here, sorry, at the front here where it's been thumbed through, but it presents really well. And it's just such a shame that the color bleach is quite severe on it. Now, I haven't got a clue what that color damage would do if I was to send it to CGC. I don't know how harshly they would grade or downgrade that because of the color bleach. But yeah, another good lesson for your viewers, Luke. Don't leave your comics in direct sunlight. And just be very wary if you are hanging them on the walls or have displays like I know both you and I have. Make sure it's not in direct sunlight, or else over time you will get that bleach.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm not too sure what CGC's stance is in regards to this. We'll have to look it up and find out and mention it in a later video. I too have a comic book that is so heavily sun bleached, it's unbelievable. And that is my first appearance of Mysterio from Spider-Man issue number 13. You can actually see that in mine and Ben's retro reads that we've recently done. It may or may not be out before this video, so if it's not out yet, we'll link to it soon. But yeah, in this room where I've got comics on display, these curtains, blackout blinds, they are never opened. They are sealed shut. Obviously I open them to dust and clean and stuff, but they remain closed. This is the problem that I have with slab books, because you can have a 9.8 of anything, and over time they won't be equal to each other. You know, certain people will leave these books out in sunlight, they will get sun bleached, and we're going to be right back to square one where we're going to be arguing over these encapsulated grades. Do you have any thoughts on that, Peter?
Yeah, I think you're right, Luke. And I think there's been a number of issues recently, hasn't there, where it's been raised on CGC message boards where people have sent comics in for a rehold. So that's where you basically send your book in and ask them to renew the case. And I think CGC have noticed that it's not the same grade because of damage or because of things you've just described. So we've actually regraded the book. And it's really wound people up because they're saying, well, hang on, I sent a 9.8 in and you'd come back at a 7 or whatever. But that's probably the right practice for them to do.
So is that something that they can legally do? Because surely grading a book is part of the expense. And if you're only sending it to be reholstered, are they allowed to just grade it without your consent?
I'm not sure. Look, maybe I've got it wrong. I don't know, but I'm sure I read something about that. Yeah. So difficult. But I think in my mind, as a collector, I think that's the right practice to do. Because like you see, I don't want to be buying a 9.8 that looks like that. I mean, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's an interesting one.
It is. It's tricky because, and again, like we have to ask the question, are books more than just their covers? You know, I know that CGC won't grade a coverless book. You know, I know that for a fact. We've seen it written on their forums, on their web pages, etc. You get the NG, the no grade.
Yeah.
But that being said, does that take away from the rest of the book? You know, you could have absolutely stunning, beautiful, clear, crisp pages within that, you know, within that cover, despite the fact that it's been sun bleached. It's so hard that the book isn't judged on more.
Well, there seems to be a big move at the moment as well, isn't there, for people buying single pages, graded single pages. I'm not quite sure what I think of that, but I guess that plays into what you're saying about the artwork and things being of more importance than perhaps the full book at some point. But
I would love to see a full breakdown. I'd love to see like just how many points the cover alone holds over that overall grade, you know, because again, you could get downgraded for all these books. In our previous video, I showed a She-Hulk comic that was graded a 4, and the outside of that book looks very, very good. So there's clearly something wrong inside that lowered that grade. However, should it be the cover that was in worse condition, but the rest of the book fine? Does it balance out, or is there a defining difference in a number? I would love to see how it works, or have someone explain to me how that process is documented for them to come up with
And
those grades.
I guess that's the frustrating thing about the grading companies, isn't it? And this is not bashing them, because I like CGC and CBCS graded books, but this is the frustrating thing, that it's not a clear, transparent process. It seems a little bit hidden. Now, I don't know if, when it's busy there, as it always is, and it seems to be getting worse, if they have a rapid grading process which doesn't go into as much detail, and they just, because there are times, and I'm sure you've had the same, because I send quite a few books off at the moment, there are times where, and I'm no expert, but there are times where I just literally cannot see what the difference between two books is, and yet one's got a high grade, one's got a low grade. So there must be something there, you would assume, and it would be nice to have clear understanding of that, because even when you get the grade as notes, they're very vague in itself. You know?
And I've often wondered about the logistics behind CGC as a company. And this, again, this isn't me, poo-pooing them or putting them down. Like, I think they're fine. I don't tend to use them that often myself, but it's fine. Do whatever needs to be done. But I do wonder about the logistics behind it, of if you're there grading books and you know that there are very few books that come in certain conditions, and it's near to the end of the day, or it's near your lunch break or anything else, and you're there grading the book, and you know that if you do this as a 9.6, you're just done. Like, you'll go through, you get it done. But if it was to go as a 9.8, because there's very few of them on the census and everything else, you'd have to get your manager down, they would have to come see it halts the whole process. So when you've got to meet targets and do X amount of stuff per day and everything else, that weighs down on you. Whether or not you just let things slide and let it go just so that you have an easier life yourself is debatable. Like, you have to, we hold CGC and CBCS and all these other grading companies to such a high standard. And we're like, you've got to do it this way. You've got to do it this way. It's a my precious book. It's this, that, the other. But let's be honest. Are you that good when it comes to your job? Do you let things slide when you can get away with it?
How dare you, sir? Yes.
I mean, no, I know for a fact that I wouldn't want to be calling down my manager for every decision that I had to make, especially when it's the difference between one grade or the other. I think it's quite easy just to let that pass as a grade where you don't have to talk to your boss, because who wants to talk to their boss?
I think you're right, Luke. And I think, grading, like any kind of human process, is very subjective. Now, I'm sure they have a process to work through, a guide to work through, or whatever it may be. But there is always human error, and there's always fatigue, and there's all these other things play into it, I think. So yeah, I don't know. Like I say, I don't want to CGC bash, because I do use the company, but I think there is some variation in practice, shall we say, or it feels that way when you're sending books off.